Okay.
Hello, and welcome once again to Bible Talk with Bruce and Becky. It's a hot summer day here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I hope it's a little more pleasant where you are, perhaps. But we're ready to plunge into chapter 32 and hope to do two chapters today. As Jacob begins his trip back home to Canaan from Padan Aram, where he spent 20 years serving his father-in-law, Laban, and he's going to meet one of the great fears of his life, that he will encounter his brother Esau after those 20 years. Remind us, Becky, why Jacob would be afraid to encounter Esau at this point.
Well, he tricked him out of his birthright, and what was the other thing?
His blessing from his
Yeah, his
father.
blessing from his father. I always equate the two, so I get them confused. It's
Birthright, blessing.
okay.
Birthright has to do with inheritance. Blessing has to do with wishing a good future upon his descendants.
Okay.
He has a blessing. Jacob will have a blessing for all of his children, but Jacob gets the best blessing. Well, Jacob has been deceitful all of his life up to now. He deceived Laban, his father-in-law, uh, several times, and Laban deceived him. That kind of deception back and forth dogged Jacob uh, until the future from where we are now in the story. Let's begin in Genesis 32. I'll read. Verses 1 through 8. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim, which in Hebrew means two camps. Anytime you have the AIM ending on a Hebrew word, that is a dual version. Well, I want to pause here and ask the question of somebody who knows, what's up with these angels meeting him? That's all we're told about this incident.
But they met him and
And we
went on
don't
their
know.
way. Okay.
Just he encounters angels. Is that a sign to encourage him? I don't know. The Bible
Well,
doesn't spell it out.
angels are supposed to be messengers, so you would think they would tell him something.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yep.
But if they did, it
We
was for
don't.
his ears only. When Moses comes along much later, there's a mysterious encounter he has with angels down in Egypt. And Jacob will have a further encounter with the angel of God later in this chapter. But angels show up. I don't know if it's a farewell party, a welcome home party, or good luck on the journey. But there's so many of them, he calls it God's camp.
So many angels?
So many angels.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about two angels, but you're talking about a bunch of
No,
angels.
it's two camps.
Okay. Are they left over from the ladder?
Maybe the ladder was pulled up before they got back to heaven. I don't know. We can have fun with it, but it's there. Yeah, the Mahanaim is two camps, not two angels.
Okay.
One camp is Jacob and his people, and the other is the angels. Do
Okay.
they continue to accompany them? Is not said. Well, Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Edom is named indirectly for Esau, both of them being red. So maybe his family and friends called him Red in naming him Esau. instructing them, that is, the messengers that are going to Esau, thus shall you say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I might find favor in your sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he's coming to meet you. And there are 400 men with him. So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him and the flocks, the herds and camels into two camps, thinking if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, the camp that is left will escape. Here's two camps again. He doesn't have enough fighting men to go up against Esau and his 400. He assumes that Esau is still holding a grudge against him, which we might expect from his treatment of his brother. So he tries to protect at least part of his possessions by dividing them into two groups. All right, Becky, let's go on with the story. And I'm going to ask you to read a long passage from verse 9 all the way through 21.
And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass on ahead of me, and put a space between drove and drove. He instructed the first, when Esau my brother meets you and asks you, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you? Then you shall say, they belong to you, your servant. They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover, he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and the third, and all who followed the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him, and you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp.
Jacob, it seems, is quite nervous about meeting his brother. He's making all kinds of plans to try to appease him and to turn away his wrath. He gives him quite a present and all that listing of cows and goats and ewes and rams and donkeys and camels. By the way,
They said milking camels. I've never thought about milking a camel.
I don't want to think about milking a camel.
It'd be easier than milking a cow.
Probably, but yes, they do milk camels.
You don't have to sit on a stool to milk a camel.
It depends on the camel. By the way, speaking of camels, up until, let's say, 75 years ago, maybe 50 to 75 years ago, the consensus among scholars was that there were no camels in Palestine at this time, that they had not yet reached that area from Mesopotamia and other places,
Did they
Arabia.
interview the camels?
Well, that's a good question. I was going to ask you,
How would they know?
how did you determine whether there were camels? Why did they think there were none? It gives you a little insight into scholarship and how it can change over the years as more knowledge becomes available. Did they find a knowledgeable camel and interview him or her in order to, when did your family move into this area? No, not how they did it. Did they find the writings left behind by camels? Perhaps drawings or inscriptions of camels? If you, Becky, were going to determine whether or not there were camels and when they came to Palestine, what would be the best way to do that?
I guess archaeological evidence.
Woohoo! Becky scores again. And what kind of archaeological evidence would camels leave behind?
Poop.
Well, maybe fossilized poop. Let's go with skeletons.
Oh,
They found the bones of camels, and they were able to date them, as they do, by the layer in which they were found and other things that were found with them. So now it's the consensus, yes, there were camels, just as the Bible had already said. As far as I know, in every case that I've ever read about and studied about, something like that is a challenge from scholars against the Bible. The Bible turns out to be accurate. We're able to get further information. It doesn't prove that it's the Word of God, but it does prove that it was accurately recorded and passed down, and the details, the facts of it can be held with confidence. Anything else you want to say about camels?
I didn't start this. You did.
I know. I'll leave camels alone now. And we'll go back to angels. Famous encounter that Jacob has along the Wadi Jabak. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, or sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabak. Or we would call that maybe Jabak Creek, or more accurately, the Jabak is a wadi, W-A-D-I. Know what a wadi is?
I'm guessing it's a place where a creek is usually, but sometimes it isn't.
Hey, way to go! The streams in that area were, in long periods of the year, dry, no water in them. And then when the rains came and when snow melted on some of the mountains, the wadi would be overflowing with water. You recall the story of the wise and foolish builders that Jesus would tell much later. One built his house on the rock, and where did the other build his house?
On the sand.
On the sand, which happened to be the bed of a dry wadi, much to his later consternation. Okay, we're at the wadi or the creek Yabak, and he puts his family on the other side of the stream and everything else that he had with him, and Jacob was left alone. And the man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." He said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob, Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Although the meaning of the name Israel is still much debated, it seems to mean in this account the one who strives with God. El on the end of that name means El, the generic name for God. Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" In other words, I'm not going to tell you. Why does Jacob want to know the man's name?
Well, I've heard that there are people who believe that you have to know the name of a spirit in order to control that spirit. But has that got
That's
anything?
true. Knowing another person's name is a way to gain power or control in ancient cultures and some modern cultures as well. The suggestion here that he's wrestling with the angel of God, or at least something more than just a man, again, a mysterious story. The meaning is not completely fleshed out here for us. Well, one reason we have these stories in Genesis, I think, is to show us we don't have to and we won't know everything about what God is doing. He reveals what he wants to reveal and keeps secret what he wants to keep secret. And there the man blessed Jacob. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." Peniel means something like the face of God. So Jacob thinks that he's been wrestling with the angel of the Lord or with God himself. Who won this contest?
I don't think there's a question of winning or losing.
Okay.
I think it was a draw. Uh, well, not exactly. I mean, God's all powerful, so he did what he wanted to do. That's all I know.
God did his will, huh?
Yeah.
It doesn't say either one of them actually won the contest, but Jacob holds on for dear life and won't let the man go without a blessing. And
Say uncle.
no, say Peniel.
Oh.
The sun rose upon him as he past Penuel, limping because of his hip. You'll notice two different spellings here for the same name, and it's that way in other places in the Old Testament. Sometimes this place is called Peniel, sometimes it's called Penuel. It's just different spellings. But several places are named because of the significance with God. Bethel, the house of God, is named several times. But Jacob is limping because the man has dislocated his hip somehow.
That's got to be painful.
Sounds like it. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. Don't ask me any more about that. My anatomy's not good enough. But it's a story to explain. It's what's called an etiology. Etiology. A story to explain how something came about, especially why a place has the name it does. And this is the place where Jacob's hip socket was injured.
Does that go for all the animals they ate? Every sinew of every hip socket?
Boy, that's a great question. Or girl, that's a great question. And I have the answer. I don't know. Beats me.
Yeah.
Something they knew more about than we do.
Okay.
Well, the long awaited encounter with Esau now takes place. And Becky, please read.
We stopped right there.
No, that's where we wrestle with God.
Oh, okay.
Chapter 33, read the first 17 verses.
Okay. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last, Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand, for I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." Thus he urged him, and he took it. Then Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, till I come to my Lord in Seir." So Esau said, "Let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of that place is called Succoth.
And what does the footnote tell you that means?
Excuse me. Camp. Another camp.
He camped again, huh? Okay, an interesting, I find a very powerful and moving story about the reunion of two brothers. I think Becky found it moving as well. Do you want to comment on what was touching you in your emotions?
I've been a long way away from family for a long time.
So it's a family reunion takes place here. I find in the whole story of Jacob and Esau that I feel more sympathy for Esau all the way through. Although he has some recklessness in his nature, his brother is deceitful at every point in the relation between the two of them. But God blesses Jacob and his descendants, which indicates, among other things, what often happens in the Bible. God doesn't treat us according to our behavior, but according to his grace. He blessed Jacob as Jacob had asked him when he was leaving home to go to Padan Aram. Even though Jacob had deceived his father and his brother Esau, and Jacob here in the apparently last encounter with Esau deceives him once again. Did you notice what Jacob said? By the way, he's flattering Esau all the way through. In the whole account, he refers to Esau as my Lord and himself as your servant. He told him, "I can't keep up with you. You go back home to Seir," which is Edom, now would be part of Jordan.
Can't drive the flocks.
"And I'll get there at the pace of the flocks and catch up with you." Did Jacob do that? No. He hightailed it in the other direction and went to a place that he named Sukkos, which means booths here. Sukkos is
Misread it.
booths.
Okay.
Later on, there's a feast of booths, honor where the people lived in the wilderness, but that'll come along later under Moses. Jacob did not follow his brother. He's still afraid of him, apparently, and still looking out for number one before everything else. It takes a long time, maybe till the end of his life, for Jacob to give up his habit of deceit. Well, I'll read the end of this chapter and we'll shut her down for today. Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city. From the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. Then he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel.
Easy for you to say.
No, it isn't. He named it God, the God of Israel. Thus we come to the end of our count today, and Becky has gotten up and is wandering around. Are you okay back there?
Yeah. Nose is running. Okay.
Jacob gets back to what could be called home country, although all he buys is the place where he has pitched his tent. And he buys that from Hamor, Shechem's father. We're going to learn all about these two men in the next chapter, and a disgraceful story involving Leah's daughter, Dinah. We'll notice that when a woman is named in Genesis, usually something bad happens.
Not always our fault.
I didn't say it was her fault. It usually is not her fault. Often she's the victim, but that's the only time they seem to give the name of a woman, except for the wives in a few cases. But Dinah's going to be at the source of some trouble between these two groups of people. And we'll see that next week. And if you want to read ahead, read ahead, ask yourself as you read, why is this story told here in Genesis?
Or told at all.
Yeah, we can say or told at all. We'll try to answer that next week. If next week gets here. If it doesn't, I won't have to worry about answering it. Okay, we're about to finish up with Jacob and his family. I keep promising we're going to get to Joseph, and it's getting closer every time. But for now, we're going to say, as always, don't send money.